Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Prime Lunchtime with City Manager Brian Johnson. He is with us today, but before we get to Brian, I just want to be able to, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. There's the pedestrian bridge, the old Fiserv property zonings that are going on in the city, and along with several other things, special use permits that are being considered, redevelopment report, a bunch of things going on. So it's going to be a packed time with Brian. We're going to be talking about that. But I want to also talk about our lead sponsor, Hargrave Fiber. They're a Southeast company that does fiber optics, really big in the communities that they're in. Here in Peachtree Corners, they're here, Lawrenceville, they're in Savannah, Jacksonville, Florida, a whole bunch of places. They provide fast internet services, and especially in this time of COVID and teleworking and even going back to work, and companies that still have employees teleworking, it's a great time for them to be servicing you because they have smart office tools that can take care of things for you, and they have great packages that they can work with small businesses as well as large enterprise sized businesses. So visit them at hargravefiber.com/business and find out more about why the city and Curiosity Lab is using them and why you should be using them as well. So let me bring on Brian. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, Rico. How are you?
It's always good to have you on the show. Of course, it's prime lunchtime with the city manager, so I'm sorry I'm taking you from lunch, but next time we'll do DoorDash maybe. We can have a beer while we're talking.
That's right.
There's a lot of stuff going on in the city, and God knows when I started Peachtree Corners Life, Brian, back 3+ years ago, I started it because of misinformation on the web and people talking. I think at the time, and we're still talking about it, right? Pedestrian bridge, but there was misinformation back then. And I would comment on next door, and I all of a sudden get pinged 100 times in that day because I forgot to adjust my notifications. And I'm like, why is everyone talking about this bridge? And the stuff they were saying was like half the stuff was like inaccurate and wrong, and just I mean, listen, things happen. I can understand shortcuts and people saying things, and but you have to be a bit accurate in what you're putting out, especially on the web. We don't want to be providing misinformation and disinformation and becoming fake news out there and people not even understanding what's real anymore because everyone's just sharing stuff maybe that's inaccurate. 3.5 years later, now talking to you as city manager, this is a good time to be able to get accurate information out there so then we can really discuss what's going on. And if we disagree, at least we're disagreeing on the facts versus inaccurate facts.
Now, Rico, I mean, I've told you this before, and I'll continue to tell you. The fact that this exists is a really it's a benefit that most people in the community probably don't realize the level of benefit it is. And it's just a great communication vehicle to get facts out there, for you to oftentimes pose questions or present observations that I or people at the city don't necessarily always hear or see, because sometimes we have a hard time seeing the forest through the trees. So I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate you doing this, and our community is better off for it.
Thank you, Brian. It's been, um, it's been an effort. If I looked a little distracted, I'm just trying to make sure we're all out there and things are streaming the way they should be. Um, so, and even if they're not, we're going to post this on Facebook and YouTube shortly after this show. But I want to just, I appreciate what you're saying. It is an effort. Sometimes it's a one man show. It's just, as far as me doing the engineering and all the stuff out there. But I'm glad that I'm able to do this. I'm glad you're able to provide me with time, quite frankly. And that you answer questions. I mean, I'll have pointed questions sometimes, and you'll just give me the right, the answers and stuff. And this is all good. So, and we got a packed time together. So I don't know, how much time we can do this with, but
As long
yeah,
as it takes.
I appreciate that. So there was a lot of stuff going on, and we could start with city council meeting because I mean, there's other things going on in the city, but I think this week's city council meeting there was just a lot of stuff in there. And one of them is obviously the progress of the pedestrian bridge. So let's get that out of the way because I think that's easy enough. It's moving along. I've been publishing pictures, especially from people like Greg Ramsey, that's on your team, I think, and Peter Chen, who's been doing some drone shots and stuff. So he's been sharing with us. We've been posting that. Is that finishing up in October, I guess?
October 1 is going to be the ribbon cutting. So, yes, I mean, right now we're getting really close to the landings of the bridge or of the stairs, walking from the ground up to the top of those being poured. And mainly most of the remaining work, there's still a few there's some panels that have got to go up and a few things there, but most of the main work is now in the elevators and the elevator shafts. So that's what we're going to be working on between now and October 1. But October 1 will be the ribbon cutting, and it'll be good to go.
Cool. There was a question out there. Might as well put this to you also. Some people say, you hear all sorts of comments. There's always someone in the crowd that has to be the first one out there and saying we don't even need this bridge. But there was a comment about, are we over budget? Are we, how is this going? So can you address that as far as, are we over budget? How is that being handled and all that?
No, so we're on time and on budget. The all in is going to be just under $4.5 million for the bridge itself. So we're going to be coming in under that. And again, we're hitting about the time. Once we started the project, now it's been pushed back before we started a few times, but once we started, October 1 has been our date, and we're going to hit that date. There's a couple other things that have come up that that I've seen that I'll go ahead and kind of address. I mean, first and foremost, when it comes to the need, there's going to always be varying degrees of, perspective on need. Mm-hmm. I will say this, at the end of the day, whether it meets somebody's definition of need or not, it's irrefutable to not acknowledge that you have two very unique and significant areas of the city that are separated by this sea of traffic, being 141. You have the Forum, mm-hmm. and you have the Town Center. And both of those areas are significant. They're significant both from a revenue generating standpoint. They generate a lot of sales tax with business license revenue, which is one of the reasons the city doesn't have city property tax. Right. They also are unique in that they are providing, services and places to shop and eat to our community. And to be able to link those two together so that we can consider them kind of one, entity, call it our downtown, which is probably the closest, we have to a downtown, to be able to link them together at a way that's safe is important. So, whether or not it meets a threshold of vehicle numbers or pedestrian numbers to say that it's warranted is another discussion, but it is what it is. The decision was made. It was for the price tag. We do think that it is a very attractive bridge. Now, when you get into architecture, it's like art. It's in the eyes of the beholder. So, you've seen the comments too. You get a lot of people who think that it looks awesome. A lot of people who think that it looks like garbage, and plenty of people in between. At the end of the day, we did have a price tag we were, designing towards. We did have it is loosely patterned after Jones Bridge itself. We also have the requirement from GDOT to have a fence of some sort along the sides, not just to prevent people from accidentally falling over, but the fence had to have holes small enough that you could not push like a Coke can through it, so that you couldn't throw anything down on the road. Okay. And so, we came up with the perforated panels that from a distance you can see the outline of the leaves from the tree that's in the city's logo. Mm-hmm. And Then we've got the letters of Peachtree Corners on the outside. A couple things about that. One, I literally have had comments about the font of the letters. And some people saying that they didn't like the font. I mean, again, eyes of the beholder.
Wow.
The other thing is whether it's centered. That's an interesting one. A lot of people have said, oh, the letters aren't even centered.
Okay.
Well, they are the best way that you can center two words that do not contain the same amount of letters. And also, so they are centered based on that. We had to use the arch as what we're centering. We can't use the road underneath because the lanes underneath are not equidistant and there's not the same amount. So we use the arch, and then you take the middle of the arch, and that is where you have the open panel with no letters on it. And then you use that as a way to go, but Peachtree and then Corners, they're not the exact same, number of letters. So no, at the end of each side, it's not exactly equidistant from the edge of the two.
Right.
But it's as centered as you can possibly get two words that don't have the same amount of letters. And so there was thought that went into that. And so, look, I mean, again, you've been talking about this even before I got here. So
yes. I mean, the font part, the font part is always, design is always subjective, right? So, I mean, that's just, I can appreciate people saying, oh, why that font? That font was fine to me. Like, I would say, and I'm a graphic designer, I'd say that works for me. And whereas someone else may say, what about a script or something else? I mean, you're never going to make everyone happy that way. The centering part I can appreciate because I've also thought it was off-centered a little bit. But then when you looked at it holistically, I understood why, design-wise it was done that way. I mean, does everyone look at it that way? I don't know.
At the end of the day, Rico, there's a couple of things that I think that we, the community should be proud of. First of all is, back when the bridge was first, or bridge design options were first thrown out there, and I guess terms like the twin spires and all this kind of stuff was,
right.
The price tag for some of those were in the 18 to $20 million.
Yeah.
And
well, the lowest one I think was 10 to 12 million.
Right. And so we ended up doing a bridge for $4.5 million that looks the way it does, that does have historical ties, or has ties to historical design of a bridge that we had in the local community. It does provide so I think, at the end of the day, I think it looks good considering all those factors. It allows us to have a landmark here in the city.
For sure.
Which I think is maybe more important for us than other cities that have been around for a long time, because we still struggle with people who still think the area is Norcross or unincorporated Gwinnett County or whatever. And so it takes time. Some of these cities, even in Gwinnett County, have 100+ year head start on us as it relates to, placeholding. And then the last thing is let's not forget one thing. Need or not, this allows people to get between these two, developments, the Forum and the Town Center, without interacting with traffic. So there's the safety aspect that's there. And when the bridge is open, there will no longer be the ability for somebody to hit a traffic, to actuate
crosswalk
and stop traffic longer than it would normally be stopped. Because again, we've talked about it before, when you actuate a crossing signal, it has to be timed so that Aunt Mabel could make it across.
Sure.
So you're oftentimes sitting there with no other traffic and you're like, why am I waiting here still? It's because that traffic. So at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, it does increase safety for pedestrians, and it decreases the holding time at a signal for vehicles. So hopefully that it's the little things that help traffic get up and down 141.
It does, and I can appreciate the Johns Creek and the Forsyth County people going north and wanting to be able to go faster, maybe.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing, like you said before, it is a landmark. We don't have a downtown. We don't have a recognizable building or structure in the city of Peachtree Corners. There are companies that are still calling themselves Norcross, no
Right.
matter how many incentives the city gives them to change it to Peachtree Corners. We still have large companies that decide Norcross is what everyone knows, so we're still going to put it Norcross, even though they're smack in the middle of Peachtree Corners.
Right.
Right? So I mean, the ridiculousness of that. But the bridge is not that overwhelming double spire, type stuff that was originally designed or submitted as one of the renderings. And I agree with you. I mean, we need a place that when you drive over that rise a little bit, coming off the river into Peachtree Corners, that you know where you are. You
Yep.
know without a doubt that this is the city of Peachtree Corners now. And
And you just brought up on, when you said Johns Creek,
mhm,
Johns Creek has a great separated crossing um, across 141. I don't
yeah,
know if people realize that. It's actually, though, in the form of a tunnel.
right.
And so, because of that, very few people know that there is a location to connect two different developments on each side of
Hmm.
141
Hmm.
and not have to, actuate a crossing, but it's
Yeah,
a tunnel, and that they lost that ability to then have a landmark where
yeah,
they could have if they had built a bridge.
true. But Johns Creek, even as a new city, wasn't really called anything else. I mean, part of it was called Duluth, I guess, but once it became Johns Creek, I think most
Right,
people accepted that better
right.
than Peachtree Corners becoming Peachtree Corners over Norcross. So it was just
Well,
two
and
different
Norcross
beasts.
has, 100+ year head start
Yeah.
of, them existing, and that was the closest city for people to say that they
Right.
were in. But
Hmm.
there is irony when we're, triple the size of Norcross, but yet there are still a lot of people who are like, no, no, we're in Norcross. You're
Yeah.
like, are you
It's just
really?
yeah, especially companies that smack in the middle of the city.
Right.
Um, All right, so let's move on to something else that is getting also a lot of mixed cues, misinformation. Well, because people are not understanding or at least not relating it right. By the time that telephone thing, that old game about telephone where you say to one person goes to someone else is totally different. So Fiserv property, the old Fiserv property that is now that was eventually zoned special use permit to become a 55 plus active living community with the assisted living in it, memory care, eventually with 900 plus units, decides that the marketplace is not happy and they need financing and they need to start this development. But a 55 plus 900 unit facility is not going to cut it in this market. So now they come to the city to adjust. So walk us through that and give us the facts of why did they think that they could do this, and what adjustment they wanted, and what the city council did this past week.
All right. So to do so properly, let me back up a little bit to May of 2018. I mean, over 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The development of the old Fiserv property was approved by the city. And it was done so through a special use permit. And some people have asked, why was it done that way versus just rezoning the property for residential and just be done with it? Um, Especially since all the surrounding, properties are residential. And the main reason you do a special use permits, SUPs, versus rezoning is if we had rezoned it to residential, once that rezoning happens, then there is created what's called a use by right. And that is the owner then can develop it, has a right, a legal right to develop it, however he or she wants to do it without the city's involvement. So if it was done residential, then a developer could come in and they could do a residential of whatever density within reason, but that zoning classification allows whatever, um, quality of house they want, whatever amenities they want, all sorts of things they can do, and the city doesn't have any say in it. A special use permit is a way for the city to allow a use that doesn't fit perfectly. But when you create this special use permit, it allows the city to have a lot of say and to be able to put a lot of conditions on the development of a property. So I bring that up to say that, almost 2.5 years ago, this property through a special use permit was permitted to have a retirement targeted community. And maybe that's an important term here, and that is the city has from day one and continues to today to facilitate and require that this community be age targeted. And the target age is an active adult, which technically by most industry experts, an active adult community is 50 and up. The 55 and up comes from the federal government has said that if there is going to be any kind of an age restriction, the age of 55 is the only age you can use, because any other, and they randomly came up with that at some point in the past, but if you come up with any other age other than 55 as a cutoff, it is subject to age discrimination claims. So you either have to do it at 55 or you can't have any age restriction at all. So anyway, it has been age targeted from the start. And so the developers came in, it's been 3 years ago to start the process. And about 2.5 years ago, they were approved a special use permit, which has 3 pages of conditions on what they've got to do, when they've got to do certain things, what type of product count they have to have, so on and so forth. Now, when they did that initially, it is important to know, because there are some people we have seen that are acting like Tuesday night, council approved this project for the first time. And there's talk about, well, what about impact analysis and traffic studies and this and that? All of that was done over 2.5 years ago prior to the development getting approved. And when it was approved, there is a master site plan. And that master site plan has what type of unit mix, where it will be built, which phase it's going to be built. And so it laid it all out there. Now, initially, there were 2 conditions that came into play Tuesday night. One is that the entire site was, in fact, restricted to 55 and older. Now, even in that case, there is some talk about whether or not the city could restrict it 100% 55 and older, given that the federal government does allow for 20% of any age-restricted development to be, to not have to adhere to that. But regardless, the entire site was 55 and older, and there was a requirement that the 450 units was the max amount of units, number of units that could be built before the the nursing home memory care could start. You can only build 450 units before they had to build the nursing home memory care facility. Okay, so those 2 conditions. So 2.5 years ago, council approves the development, and then the developers start the process of getting ready to actually go vertical. The first thing they do is they line up all their financing. And the financing is based on phases. So they have, this project will exceed $100 million when it's all done. So they don't go out. These things are not, they don't go out and get $100 million. What they do is they get enough money to do phase 1.
Sure.
And then when they do phase 1, that generates money for them to go into phase 2, and so on and so forth. So they line up their financing. They lined up their home builder. The developer is going to do the homes. In this case, it's the Providence Group.
Okay.
They master plan the property. And by that, I mean they had submitted a conceptual plan for the purposes of getting their special use permit. But then they had to they actually had to start putting in building footprints and doing all the detail. Where exactly is the road going to go, and how wide is it going to be, and how many units can we put on there? And
Mm-hmm.
They had to do all that. They had to get this through the ARC because this is all in the river corridor. So
Right.
they have the entire site has to fit within the Metropolitan River Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
They do all of that master planning. They get their finances lined up, the developer on board. They demo over 100,000 square feet of existing office building on the site. There is not a vertical structure left on the site.
So they removed the Seaman building. They removed everything at this point.
Simmons Mattress Factory building, they did have to remove because it was cost prohibitive, and they really wanted to. They tried to work with the city. We tried to work with them to try to save it, but with the ADA requirements, the amount of vandalism that had taken place back in the recession, there was a lot of people had vandalized it to rip out the copper.
Yes, sure.
To sell that. The HVAC was still done through, it was still heated through a steam plant. Just the amount of work it would have taken. So
they've taken down all the structures. They've
taken
flattened
all of
everything.
that. There's over $1 million.
Right.
Excuse me. There's over $1 million worth of demo that they've done. They also put in the fence. Excuse me, Rico.
Sure.
I had throat surgery yesterday, and it's a little bit.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. You okay?
I am. So they put in a fence between them and all of the existing neighborhoods that are there, including all the buffer material that they had committed to. So they plant all the planting
So
and
they did all that already.
brand new. All right, so they did all this work
Mhm.
over the last 2.5 years under the age restriction of 55 and older for the whole thing. Okay. Then COVID hit right when they were getting ready to go vertical with real construction. And when COVID hit, two things happened. One, nursing homes, nobody is financing nursing homes right now because the entire industry is undergoing a bunch of change, and no banks want to touch it until what is right now considered these hotbeds of COVID activity.
For sure.
Or people are comfortable with them. And so the financing institutions are like, we're not going to build anything new until we know what this industry is going to look like. So therein lies one problem for them.
There was, just to not to digress, but there was another application for another assisted living facility that wanted to go up. They withdrew their application this week as well, right? Without prejudice. Right.
And so you end up, so the assisted living, and memory care, that's kind of, dried up right now. And then the active adult or the retiree, mainly the person who no longer has any earned income or not as much, that they're not working full time anymore. They're living off of their investments. Well, right now, that community is not doing anything because they're afraid that, look, we don't know what our investments are going to look like when this is done, and so we're going to stand pat. So because of that, the developers of the old Fiserv property, their financing is at risk. Their bank came back to them and said, you've got to have some more flexibility because if you don't, we cannot, this is a problem. And it was in the two areas that I just talked about. One is their financing did not like the fact that they were compelled to build the nursing home memory care as early in the project as we had initially required, because they're like, look, that's early with that industry being in a state of flux. And two, we would like the most amount of units that we can get prior to that because we want feeder to our nursing home memory care. We don't want to build it too early. So that was one. And the other one was you have a 55 and older, restriction on the whole thing. Well, some of these unit types, some of these floor plans you have might be a floor plan that would be of interest to somebody who is 54 years old or 52 years old or 49 years old. And these are going to be ones like the couple who doesn't have any children and they don't want to have a lot of maintenance and they don't need a yard and or the divorcee, the recent divorcee, maybe with one high school age kid,
Mm-hmm.
or there are some
Well,
examples of
these
people,
floor plans were like 2 bedroom, one bedroom,
one
three
bedroom, two
bedroom.
bedroom, three bedroom is the most that the entire thing has. And when
Yeah.
you get into the three bedroom, you're exceeding $400,000, up to $600,000
Yeah.
of per unit. And so their banks were like, look, we need you to have some flexibility on some of these floor plans so that we might be able to capture somebody who might be 52 years old. Now, it's important to note that when this development has and continues to be, because the way it's developed doesn't change, it is age targeted in the way it is being built to begin with. For instance, there are zero lot lines. So all of these structures are built up against the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
They have postage stamp yards in the back. I mean, barely big enough for you to have, an outdoor table and some chairs and whatever. There are no amenities for anybody that is recreational in nature. There's no
So
basketball courts. There's no swimming pool. There's no, those kind of
so
things. And
they're not looking to add that at any point then.
not only that, but at the meeting, some additional restrictions were placed in there. But I'll get to that real quick in
Sure.
here in a second. So we're almost at the punchline here. And so they came to the city because of COVID and said, look, we don't want to be here, but we want to see this project through despite COVID. And so they were like, these two conditions we would like to have some flexibility in. Can you allow us to build the nursing home, memory care as late as the end of the project?
Mm-hmm.
And can you allow us to relax the 55 and older mandate on some of the floor plans, some of the product types? And so that's what was in front of council. Now, what ultimately that means is, the nursing home memory care doesn't seem to be a big a deal to the community, but this age restriction does. So let me
Yeah.
dispel a couple of things. First and foremost, the product type, the age restriction hasn't been lifted on the entire development at all. In fact, if you go through and look at the product type that council did approve the restriction to be lifted, it'll only apply to about a third of the units that they could put on this property. A third. And there's about 900 units that could go there. So only about 300 of them could have somebody below 55 or older to live there. Okay. So any comment about, oh, there's no more age restriction, that's not true.
It's
And in
totally
fact,
okay.
2/3 of it still have that.
Okay.
That's
Good
one.
fact. Good fact.
It is. Two, council, because and the developers are still marketing it as age targeted, are building it as age targeted, but council did place in additional restrictions because their thought is, look, if we give them a little bit of flexibility here, maybe we can tie them up even more to make it to where the product isn't one where a family would want to move anyway. So for instance, the developers agreed to put conditions in there prohibiting them from putting in any kind of pool with diving blocks, diving boards, water slides, all that kind of stuff. They can't put in any kind of ball fields, basketball courts, any of that kind of stuff. They're not going to allow any recreational things like a mini trampoline or anything in any of the backyards. They are also restricting school buses from going on any of their streets because their streets are going to be private.
Okay.
So they're
So if they wanted to, though, so based on what you're saying, I mean, the restrictions, I can see how that would um, not be enticing to a family of with 2 or 3 kids, right? But they could put a pool, but they can't just put a pool with slides and diving boards and stuff like that.
right, because there could be a pool that's therapeutic for
Right,
some,
sure. A swim lane pool or something like that.
correct, a swim lane pool, and there are some things that active adults want to do.
Oh,
Swimming or being
I
around a
would
pool is
think.
one. Tennis courts are another one. You don't necessarily want to restrict them to, but we're talking. Oh, another one is no playgrounds. They have agreed to a condition of no playgrounds of any type.
Okay.
So the point there is, let's restrict the product such that there's really not any reason why somebody with a family would want to move in there. Now,
Right.
let's talk about the Simpson Elementary component real quick. And that has been one of the things what about Simpson? So the products are going to start at about $300,000 is going to be the price point, the lowest price point of any of the product types. And that's going to be for one bedroom. So the one bedrooms are starting in the high 300,000. Yes. And when you add rooms and move up, you will get up into 600,000.
So are these buildings going to be in the back by where the river is? By the way, are they
No.
going to be overlooking the river?
In the back, you're going to start getting into the multi-story stacked flats.
Okay.
Now that will at that point get a little bit lower. You're going to start getting down into the low 2s for the stacked flats overlooking the river. But up front, the product types that they're putting in, call it in phase 1, maybe to phase 2, 1.5 to 2, are what I just told you. So that being said, if you were a parent with a kid and you were trying to, you were interested in moving into the Simpson district, or you wanted to game the system, you're not going to end up paying what it would cost to move into this development that has no amenities for kids, when for, say, $400,000, you could buy a detached house with a yard in a neighborhood that is in the Simpson School District.
Yeah.
I mean, you start getting
for
up
the
into
same money and more bedrooms.
Right. And then you start getting up into the, 550, 600,000, then why wouldn't you build in Linfield, Riverfield, or Amberfield, or buy in there? So we don't see that there's going to be this either interest, or even it makes sense for a family trying to get into Simpson wanting to go there when there's a lot of other great housing just as close as Fiserv. And so that's why they felt like if we restrict the product type and the way the development is constructed, it will dissuade anybody but those active adults from moving in there. It's important to note that, Noble Village, everybody knows what that is here, off the Spalding. Do you know that, if I ask you what type of community that is, what would you say?
Well, I'm a little bit more familiar with that than most. Maybe it's a 55 plus, right? It's an age.
Well, it's a retirement. It's a retiree, community. Do you know that there are no restrictions that the city placed on that development at all?
No, I didn't know that, actually. I thought there would have
So
been.
I would then submit to you, why did it develop the way it has, such that there are no kids there, that it is active adult? It's because of the way it was developed and the amenity it has, or in some case doesn't have, to where why would people with kids want to move there when there are other options around there that they don't?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that particular Noble Village that business, they do these things, right? And the lead off front is also the assisted living structure in that complex, if you will, right? So,
well, it's part of it. They have, the continuity of care type of thing, where but they have independent detached residential there, all the way up until, like you said,
me personally, I don't actually believe in that type of community per se. I think people do better when there's a mix of people in a community, younger and older. I can see why some people just want to be in a 55 plus because that's what they want to do, maybe. But personally, I think people do better when there's a mix of age levels and diversity. But
there's one other important point to make here, and that is this decision that council had to make. So understand that what they were asked to weigh in on is this scenario in which you have this development that everybody had been happy for the last 2.5 years of going forward the way it was, and then COVID
Right.
hit.
Right.
And so the council was faced with this, situation where the developers come to the city and say, hey, we want to keep going. We've spent money,
Mm-hmm.
but our financing is at risk. And if we don't get a little bit more flexibility, we run the risk of this project falling apart. Now, from council's standpoint, what we've got to always consider is the worst case scenario, as well. And so what could happen is if the city had said, no, we don't care. We want it to be 55 and older. We don't want any more flexibility. You agree to that 2.5 years ago, done. Well, if then as a result of that, the project falls through, they declare bankruptcy or they sell it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. Know that there is still a use by right component that exists. Meaning somebody could come in and develop it under the office or the institutional zoning and develop it in a way that the city will have no say in how that would happen. And, when you look at zoning classifications, and you know this from being on the Gwinnett County, oftentimes you're looking at what is the worst type of use that could fall under that. And, that's not to say it will, but, somebody could come in and say, you know what, this is office. We're going to put in a massive call center operation. Mm-hmm. We're going to put in 2,000, we're going to create 2,000 jobs at a call center. And now you got 2,000 people crushing in the morning to go to work and 2,000 people crushing at night, or it's a 24-hour operation and you got 2,000 people there all the time and shift change. And that's one. Or another one is like an at-risk behavioral health, youth detention campus. Last city I was at had one where it's a large property campus with dormitories for, at-risk.
Sure, those things are allowed on the original zoning.
And there's not a thing the city could do. And so the city is like, are we going to potentially create, and I know those are worst case scenarios, but those are ones that exist that the city couldn't stop, at least with a special use permit.
Regulate. And I don't think people understand, and then let's move on after this, but I don't think people understand a special use permit, as was given, just gives them that special use if they choose to do it. You give them permission with set of rules, or they can stick to what the original zoning was and use it for that. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah, you're right.
So they could step back and say, okay, well, we're done with the SUP. We're just going to do what it's made, which was the, what is it, M1 office?
No, O&I. O&I.
So office industrial zoning.
No, office institutional.
Institutional, sorry. So, so there's a whole list of things that could be done under that, and you mentioned a few of them. I think, in my opinion, the city did it the right way. I think you limited what they wanted. You actually gave them less than what they wanted. And you also added some additional restrictions to this that they had to go with. So it's not like in a negotiation you give them what they want. You actually gave them, but you also took away certain privileges and you've limited what they can do with that property now. Which, like you said, if you're a family of 2 or 3 kids, that's not the place where I would want to bring my family to, because there's no playgrounds, there's no facilities for them, right? So I think in the scheme of things.
And I appreciate that. At the end of the day, it wasn't an ideal situation for anybody.
No, of course not.
We would rather have not had to hear it. I'm sure, given all that they went through, they amended their request after the Planning Commission meeting. And they had a number of community meetings after the Planning Commission meeting. And I know some people have been like, oh my goodness, Planning Commission recommended against approval, and then the council just approved it anyway. Well, there were changes from when the Planning Commission heard it to what council approved. So that's as a result of Planning Commission and their recommending of denial. The developers met with people in the community and other stuff. They amended their request, and then council added to it. So it's not ideal. We wouldn't have rather, but again, given what we're currently in this new environment right now, we didn't want to see this product not be done. And so we felt like it was better this way than to maybe lose the entire project.
Oh, I don't disagree there. And real developments, especially long term like this, things will change. So I can appreciate what the city has to go through and weigh those considerations. You don't want a business, you don't want something like this to fall apart. You also don't want to be held ransom by the developer to decide what to do, because there's a domino effect, right? You look at, and we've discussed this before, you look at the apartments that are allowed to be built on town center, the 160 plus units there that has to be built in the same development path as the Indigo Hotel that was also promised there. And we still don't know what's going on there as far as where they are. For all we know, they may come back at some point and say, listen, the hotel business, not so much, right? 10% occupancy, 20% people not going out. They're not doing the conventions as much as they used to. We're going to hold off on that. But we need to start building something, and we got land we're paying interest on and stuff. Yep. And something has to be done. They may come back and say, we need to get this going. Can we make an adjustment?
Yeah.
But that's a good time then to say, okay, maybe, but you know what? Maybe it becomes an LEED certified building. Maybe it's a smart building. Maybe it's a condo building instead of apartments. Maybe it gives you the city at least some leeway. But we have to understand that may come at some point, right?
Oh, we expect the hotel component to come to us.
Yes.
Well, I agree. So you're right. At the end of the day, they want something, and then you are like, okay, well, you've got to give us something in return, and that's what the negotiation is about.
And you know what? And it's a good time, since we're a smart city. We want to be cutting edge. We want to be able to do the things that we're talking about doing. To say, you know what? That'll be the biggest building, short of maybe the Hyatt, the Hilton, in the city of Peachtree Corners, and it's going to be a landmark in town center, essentially. So it better look like a landmark, and it better act like a smart city structure that's controlled the way a smart city should be.
Having a LEED certified building would certainly fit into that. You're completely right about that.
Yeah. So, if they do come back, which I promise everyone that's listening, that will come back at some point. That Indigo building, that Indigo Hotel will not happen. I guarantee that.
Yeah, not in the, well, he's got to do something within the next 2 years. So I know for sure.
Too, yes.
So yeah, he doesn't have, if he had indefinite, we could say, well, maybe he sits on it, but he doesn't have the ability to sit on it. He's got to do something within the next 2 years. So yes, we are fully expecting something to come soon.
Okay, so let's move on to a few other things here, and because we're getting towards almost an hour on here, and I don't want to keep you too long, especially after your throat. You should take care of yourself. Okay. There was a resolution passed, I think, with approved. Give us some quick details about the mask face covering in buildings owned by the city or leased by the city only.
All right. Well, so that one is just what you said. Masks are required inside of city-owned buildings, which in our current case only applies to City Hall or the Curiosity Labs Innovation Center. Those are the only two, but in public parts of those buildings, you have to have a mask when you enter the door.
So when citizens enter the door, is that employees as well?
Yeah, anytime anybody is in public space, say at City Hall, like if I walk out to the lobby right now, leave my office, I would need to put my mask on to go out into the hallway to go to the lobby.
Okay. All right. There was also a resolution that was approved to adopt the City of Peachtree Corners Urban Redevelopment Plan. Now, I'm not putting these things in any order, but explain to us quickly what the Urban Redevelopment Plan is. I know we've discussed.
So we're getting ready to populate an Urban Redevelopment Authority. In fact, you will see within the next day, or maybe Monday at the latest, the call for resumes for those who want to be a part of the Urban Redevelopment Authority. But much like our Downtown Development Authority, its job is going to be looking at it, ways that the city or that authority could facilitate redevelopment in places in the city that are ripe for it. And so the redevelopment plan merely sets the initial area to be of focus.
Right.
and kind of lays out the very first step. And once the board is seated, they'll take that plan and then they'll start adding other steps as they've, identified more granular level
Right.
opportunities. But this is just to get them started. And so we have to adopt a plan first for them to start from. And that's what this was.
So how many people can be appointed to that authority?
It looks like it'll be 7.
7. Appointed by the city council, I'm assuming, from
That's
resumes?
correct. Yep.
And the authority, as an authority, has the power to also facilitate any bond offerings or
Yep.
to be able to raise money for redevelopment. And redevelopment is of an area or structures that already exist that need redevelopment work on, right?
That's
So people
correct. It's
understand.
usually in areas that already have existing structures. And so
Mhm.
you're trying to repurpose them or whatever. Oftentimes, it's also in areas in which there are blighted structures.
Mhm.
The Redevelopment Authority has condemnation powers,
Okay.
so it can condemn structures. And so, there's a lot of tools it has at in its toolkit, and
Mhm.
it'll bring those to bear to start working on areas of the city that maybe can have some repurposing and redevelopment of them.
So just to give a quick example, not that this place is ripe for that, but recently the old LA Fitness location where Uptowns used to be at Jimmy
Yep.
Carter and Peachtree Industrial Boulevard was sold for about 7.5 million or something. I think it was 40% leased only, ripe for redevelopment. If they came to the authority to say, listen, we'd love to do this, we'd like to create a multi-use development here, but we need the city to help with certain infrastructure things. That's the type of redevelopment we're looking at then, possibly.
That's exactly right. There could be, payment in lieu of taxes. There could be bonds issued on behalf of the developer through the Redevelopment Authority. There could be maybe there's some blighted structures in you know, the parcels in question that need to be. I mean, but yeah, its job would be to do what it can to facilitate a developer coming in and turning a property that maybe isn't performing quite as well as it could.
Hmm.
Maybe there's some redevelopment things that can be done to help it. So we're definitely excited about this as an opportunity.
Okay, so that's one authority. Then there's also the Peachtree Corners Public Facility Authority that was also
Yep.
approved. So tell us quickly what that actually does.
All right. So again, authorities have unique things. Public Facilities Authority oftentimes is the mechanism that cities use to either hold debt on public facilities or in some cases manage it.
Hmm.
But in this case, the reason, and you may remember, it's been about 3.5 years ago, we actually had it created. At the time,
Yes.
Public Facilities Authority was created because we were looking at renegotiating our lease on
Hmm.
the old building or moving somewhere else and leasing a building. And when the city council or the city itself executes a lease, it can only do it 1 year at a time.
Right.
It cannot execute long-term leases, whereas a Public Facilities Authority can execute long-term leases. And so you get better lease rates when you're renting from somebody who you are committed to more than 1 year at a time.
Sure.
And so we created it, but didn't ultimately use it because we got a great deal on this building, rented out top floor, and the phenomenal deal we got on this, but we own it. So we haven't stood it up, but my current finance director, who's been here like 6 months, was as he was turning over things to provide value add when he can, he
Uh-huh.
noticed that with the current rates that are out there, if we took the existing debt service the city has, which is on two things, City Hall and the old Chile property at the town center,
Right.
we combine them and we refinance them, or it's
Hmm.
essentially repaid them off and then issued them through a public bond offering,
Hmm.
that we can save about $100,000 a year over the next 10 years.
Wow.
And so,
So he's paid for himself.
right. So, by standing up the Public
Right.
Facilities Authority, offering this on the public bond market, consolidating in it, and then doing it, we're saving $100,000 a year over, I think it's over the course of the remaining period of our bond on this stuff is about 11 years. So that's over $1 million, 1.1 to $1.2 million over the course of the next 11 years. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Why not? And so we're going to do that, and the Public Facilities Authority is going to be the holder of that.
Okay.
But the first members of that are going to just be mayor and council. They're just going to, which is a pretty common practice, because there won't be a need to meet. They're just,
it's just being done for this one piece.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. There's also something that you guys passed to extend the jurisdictional boundary of the Downtown Development Authority to incorporate the southeastern portion of the city. Explain what portion there and why that was done.
Well, Downtown Development Authority, again, a third authority, has unique tools. The Downtown Development Authority is kind of its need to be actively involved in the town center is kind of at least done right now. And so there's some areas of the city that we think are opportunities for them to kind of look at, maybe be, a part of. Mm-hmm. And so that part of the city just doesn't have, was not included in the boundary of their operation. And we wanted them to be able to, look at some opportunities down there too. So, this is just extending it on and giving them a little bit more of a, broader playing field for them to play in.
Okay. And what area, specifically, what streets roughly?
You're starting to get down, it really extends down farther south, down 141 and PIB to the Doraville, kind of city limits, Mechanicsville, that kind of area.
Okay. There was a resolution, a referendum, no action taken on the Sunday sales of malt beverages, wine, distilled spirits by the drink from 11 a.m. to midnight on Sunday. I guess that's going to be, that was just, so no action was taken. So that's calling for a referendum or asking for one.
And that's the one. So the governor just signed a bill that allowed for three things to happen. One, that allowed for alcohol to be delivered to homes in Georgia.
Right.
And so now
yep.
You can have alcohol, wine, beer, liquor to be delivered to your home. That's one. Two, he allowed for, if by use, but through a referendum, not by virtue of him signing it, but if a municipality decided, it could hold a referendum allowing Sunday alcohol to be moved back from, 12:30 now, back to 11 a.m.
Right.
For either on-premise consumption or package sales. Now, if you remember, 2 years ago, we did the referendum for on-premise consumption. So restaurants could start serving alcohol as early as 11 a.m. on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And then the council put it to a referendum. The community voted yes. And the purpose there was to allow restaurants, any little thing we could do, maybe on brunch, somebody wanted their Bloody Mary at 11, right. And so they could.
It's just a 1 hour difference is what it is, really.
I thought it was a 1.5. Maybe it's only one. I thought
maybe it's 1.5, actually.
I think it's 1.5. So anyway, we did that. What we haven't done is the package sales. And so this would be more like grocery stores that are selling beer and wine. They can start selling it at 12:30 on Sundays. This would allow them to move it back to 11.
Okay.
Council ultimately decided against it because we would have to put it on a city referendum in November. Right. We don't have an election, so we would have to be holding a special called election.
Okay.
Or not a special. We would have that. That would be the only item on the ballot.
Right.
And it cost us anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 to do it. Mm-hmm. And council didn't feel like if you are, shopping at a certain grocery store currently, and a different grocery store can serve beer or wine a little bit earlier one day a week, that you're going to change your habits. So we're not we don't feel like we're afraid of losing customers to Peachtree Corners grocery stores,
Right.
because of this. So council, I could easily see them put it to a referendum a year from November when we got to have an election anyway.
Okay. Right.
They just decided not to do it on this one since it's a special called one.
All right, that's fine. The the other thing was, well, we're at the tail end here, but since someone brought it up at the meeting, is the city going to at some point consider streaming the city council meetings again, like you did during the lockdown portion, or is that going to be considered to be done again?
So a couple things. One is it is important to remember that when we were at shelter in place and we had meetings made available to the public from, through a streaming platform,
Mm-hmm.
it was when everybody was doing it, including council. So in other words, there were not physical people at City Hall.
Right.
To compare that to when we're having an in-person meeting is not a apples to apples comparison. So when all of council is in the council chambers, for us to set up a WebEx, is
It's
a
more
lot
complicated.
It is, because when every council member was at home, like we're doing, and I got a
Mhm.
speaker close to here, the camera's on here, so
Right.
you can see me. You can make it work, but when all of them are in one big room
Mm-hmm.
and they're not always speaking into the microphones all the time, and the camera's not always on them, it's a lot more complicated. Excuse me. So that I just want to make sure that people know that people are like, well, it was done before. Well, no, it hasn't been done in a live stream event because before it was while everybody was remote. Now that we're getting back to everybody here, we have decided to upgrade the council chambers the best we can to allow for it to be live streamed. Now, remember, all we're doing is adding about 24 hours to this because
Mhm.
currently council meetings are already taped, and about 24 hours later they have been post-produced. And by that I mean we have adjusted the volume on individual council members that don't always speak loud into the microphone.
Sure.
We have changed camera views because we have a number of cameras running at once, but
Mm-hmm.
we can, after the fact, change camera views if we feel like somebody's talking and it's not a good view.
Right.
You can't do live because you'd
It
have
would
to have a
be
lot of people.
right. It would be a better production value presented. I guess if you do live stream, I mean, ultimately, I think what it comes down to is that eventually, at some point, um, participants that are viewing, citizens that are viewing, can participate in that council meeting either through chat or through, if they can't make it down to the meeting but they want to do a public comment, to be able to eventually be able to do that type of interaction. Because I agree with you, 24 hours later, that's fine. It's not going to kill anyone to wait
Not only
24
that,
hours
but
to
we
watch.
can also split screen stuff to where then somebody who presented something on a PowerPoint, we can actually split screen it so you can see the
Right.
speaker in the PowerPoint. But we can't do that live.
Right. No, so I agree with you. I mean, 24 hours later is not a big deal at this point. The only advantage, if it was going to go down that road for same live stream, is if the other components of that is enabled. The chat component, the video presentation from someone that cannot make it to the meeting but would like to make a public comment. I mean, if that can be added, and there's some dangers there, obviously, because you don't know what's going to happen, as far as someone may be doing stupid stuff on there, but
So to answer your question, though, we are outfitting the council chambers to allow for a live streaming product
Mm-hmm.
that is better than we currently have.
Okay.
So we are at our next council meeting in September. I do believe we'll be ready to start live streaming it. We'll still post produce and have a better product 24 hours later, but we will allow for live stream. We're also going to start live streaming and taping Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals meetings that are in there too,
Oh, cool.
which did not
Okay.
happen. So people can do that now. At some point, we will look at, I could see possibly having somebody who's not there, maybe being able to address council via live stream. The chat portion, I'm not sure we're going to end up being in a position to where you're going to have a live chat, just because you got to have somebody manning it.
Right.
Who do you do the back and forth? But I do think that there could be a potential for us to have it to where if you couldn't make it, but you wanted to be in, have that 2-3 minutes, 2 minutes at the beginning of council where you just wanted to say something, we could set it up to where you could be at home, but yet you could live stream in and council could hear you present it and see you.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
So anyway, we are going to do that, and I think it might be ready as soon as this next council meeting in September.
Really? Wow. Excellent. All right, we've hit our hour plus, and I appreciate you being with me and answering all these questions and bringing clarity to some of the issues and some facts to some of the issues going on, and being able to explain it with someone that knows exactly what the deal is, especially with the old Fiserv property and some of the other things with the bridge and stuff. It's really good having you, Brian, to be able to do that. Hopefully, your throat
thanks
operation.
for doing it. Yeah, I'll get there. Getting old is not for the faint of heart. But
That's what they say. Yes,
that's right. But thanks for giving the city this opportunity again to get that information out there. Thanks for everything you're doing to make our community great.
Well, thank you, guys. Look forward to the next issue. I'm going to leave you with this thought. We're going to be doing a pets and their people issue. That'll be a pull-out in the center of the magazine. So get your pictures together for you and your pet that you can submit. We're going to be doing a giveaway starting next week as well. And I think we will also be doing so we're going to be asking people what they're thankful for. And we're going to be able to feature some of that in the print version of the magazine. So think about that. I know we're all thankful for our families. And of course, I could have 50 people talking about their families that way. But think about unique things that you think you're thankful for this year, regardless of the things that have been going on. I'd like to see if you would submit that at some point. We'll put that as a call to action out on Facebook and Instagram. So this way we can publish that in the magazine's next issue. But in the meantime, I appreciate the work you've done, Brian, and your team, and the city, and the mayor, and the city council. Always good stuff going on, it seems, and I appreciate you bringing, like I said, clarity and facts to our lives here.
Our pleasure.
So, thank you, Brian. Hang in there.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.